and we will get to Charkoudian's bill, Orig's bill later. So, but Trish, just let me know when when YouTube is. Oh, it's now live streaming. So
yep, just now.
Okay, here we go. Welcome back to the Environment and Transportation Committee. I am, for the record, Chairman Kumar Barve, and we have a number of bills. We ordinarily do them in numerical order, but Delegate Charkoudian isn't able to be here right at this moment, so we're going to go to House Bill 115. Delegate Moon, you've got the floor. You get 4 minutes, and what you're going to see on the timer is 2 and 2, because that way we don't have to go through the rigmarole of resetting it from 4 to 2 to 4 to 2, stuff like that. So take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. House Bill 115 is pretty simple. It's another bill to deal with decriminalizing suspended driver's licenses. I apologize that we're back before you with this one, because I really thought we had caught most of these in our last 2 go-rounds, but the public defenders came by and flagged that we missed one. So it is not a crime to possess a suspended license, but we left display accidentally on there as a jailable offense. So for most of these where your license was suspended because you couldn't pay something, a ticket say, we're trying to get away from having jail be the consequence of that. And again, for a suspended license in particular, it's a temporary designation, and people often get their license privileges back, in which case display would be them using that license while they're waiting for their suspended status to clear up. So happy to answer any questions.
So you basically think it's not a good idea to spend $50,000 a year putting a person in jail for this offense? Is that what you want me to believe?
That's correct. And for those who have a final concern, I will say actually JPR did flag something they wanted changed in this, and that's that if you're displaying a license that was suspended for an alcohol-related violation, they actually requested that we remove that and leave the penalty there. So we did that in this year's bill, so it should be good to go.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor? Delegate Clark has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Lamb, just refresh my memory on this just a little bit. When you say display, is that just to be used, displayed and using for any function, say like ID, like if they come in a package store or a bar and use it?
There's not a specification to that level. So it's just, and there's a list of these types of offenses. It's an offense to drive suspended, to possess the suspended, to use the suspended, to display the suspended. And so when we went and took the jail time off, most of these, we just somehow missed the display one in the list.
Yeah, well, when you say display, I mean, if I ask someone for a driver's license and it's ultimately suspended, it doesn't say suspended on the license, and they use it for an ID for age, is that still okay?
So under the bill, and to be clear, though we took jail off as a penalty for all of these, we didn't actually legalize any of this behavior. So it's still a fine, and it's 3 points on your record. That's just the default. Again, unless your suspension is because of an alcohol-related violation, in which case actually there would be possible incarceration. But if the source of your violation is you couldn't pay something, it would just uniformly knock the penalty down to a $500 ticket and 3 points on your record.
Okay, well, I'm still a little teeny bit confused, but I'll figure it out. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions for the sponsor? I don't see any, so we will go to the one and only person signed up to testify in favor, Christine DeFore. Christine, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. I'm a supervising attorney with the Office of the Public Defender on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I do everything from felony murder cases right down to driving suspended cases. What we often see is when someone is stopped for speeding, they open their wallet, they display their license, and it comes back after a record check to be suspended. We'd like to make this on parity to what we came to you before with the possession of a suspended license being reduced from a jail penalty to a $500 fine and reduce the points from 12 points to 3. To answer Delegate Clark's scenario, it'd be very rare if someone was displaying their license at a liquor store that anyone would check the suspended. It's really only the police officers who would check that. The remainder of that statute really covers what perhaps delegates might be concerned about: displaying a fake ID, displaying a fictitious ID. Those are all and remain jailable offenses. This is really the scenario where someone is stopped at the side of the road for speeding. They pull up their license to hand to the officer, and unbeknownst to him, perhaps it's been in suspended status for failing to pay a fine or failing to do driver improvement program or something of that nature. So this is really putting it on parity with what we did with possession. And I do see troopers and police officers charging this, knowing that it's still jailable, even though the act of driving on a suspended license for failing to pay a fine or failing to do driver improvement does not remain a jailable offense. So the displaying does, but not the act of actually driving. With that, I submit, we ask for a favorable report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Dufour? I don't see any, unless, Jerry, you have your hand up thing. Is that, okay, you don't, all right. Okay, it looks like there are no further questions, and that will conclude the public hearing on House Bill 115. Is Delegate Charkouti in the waiting area? She's not.
She's not. You can go to Delegate Stewart.
We'll go to Delegate Stewart, House Bill 178. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, HB 178. So I know I don't need to tell you all this, but obviously the pandemic has changed our lives in many ways. But this afternoon, I want to talk a little bit about one of the changes that we haven't discussed much so far this session. Starting from the early days of the pandemic in the spring, constituents flooded my office with reports of speeding motorcycles and cars near their homes. Just a few months ago, a mother in my district reached out to me on Facebook with a story about how she was with her 3 children in the car and narrowly avoided a fatal collision with one of these high-speed racers. These reckless motorists have been taking advantage of the relatively empty roadways to engage in the idiotic hobby of speed racing. And this problem isn't just confined to my district or just my county. Marylanders across the state have witnessed accidents and close calls, and they've worried about these crashes turning deadly. So in response, my office reached out to law enforcement agencies and worked with neighbors to craft the legislation that's before us this afternoon. And while more enforcement is always helpful, HB 178 makes 3 changes designed to make it easier for officers to do their jobs and to crack down on dangerous driving. So first, the bill would make it illegal for the first time to knowingly obscure a license plate for the purposes of evading speed detection. And the fine would be $500 maximum. This is a response to drivers using reflective shields over their plates to avoid camera detection. These shields are available. You can Google them. These shields are available on Amazon for $30, and they're becoming more and more common. Second, the bill would enhance penalties for motorists who engage in either reckless driving or speed contests. Maximum fines for both would increase to $1,000, and motorists would be required to appear in court to pay the fine. One of the reasons Maryland is a hotbed for these racing contests is because our neighbors are much tougher on this behavior. West Virginia's fine, for example, goes up to $1,000 right now. Virginia's goes up to $2,500, and they require drivers to appear in court. And Delaware and Pennsylvania impose draconian and immediate license suspension penalties for drivers who engage in these contests. Finally, the bill tackles the related issue of modifying an exhaust system. These racers often have modified mufflers to make them loud. And under current law, modifying an exhaust system in a way that makes it louder than factory is a violation subject to a $70 fine. So when we were initially writing this bill, we proposed to just basically change it to an increase of $200. But in response, we've heard from several affected hobbyists who are dissatisfied with the current law. And so we have drafted a few amendments to try to sort of sing kumbaya with them and forge a broader coalition here. And so the bill with the amendments would make the current prohibition on modified exhaust systems easier to enforce. It would basically create a situation where officers would write what's called a fix-it ticket to drivers who they think might have a louder exhaust system than 95 decibels. And then the drivers would go to some sort of station to get it tested and get it fixed. And if they get it fixed and get it tested in time, they wouldn't have to pay the penalty. But if they don't, then they would. So I think this would be a fairer system. And then also in the amended version of the bill, we've exempted historic cars from this modification of exhaust provision under current law. Because at the end of the day, we're not trying to go after hobbyists with 66 Corvettes. We're trying to go after folks who are making our roads more dangerous, less safe. So taken together, I think this will help law enforcement crack down on those motorists while at the same time respecting law-abiding hobbyists. So let's end these reckless speed contests. Let's keep all of our constituents and all Marylanders safe. I urge your favorable report on HB 178.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor? Delegate Fraser Hidalgo. Dave, unmute.
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you. Is that an ERO, an equipment repair order? Is that what fix-it means?
Yeah, exactly. That's what several states already have. Basically, right now, you got a situation where, as you probably know, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo better than anybody. Right now, you got a situation where you could buy a Honda Accord that sends out 50 decibels, and you could buy, some sort of sports car that's at 90 decibels. Right now, under current law, you can't increase it over factory. So even if you increase the Accord to 60 decibels, that would be a violation of current law. Whereas having an already pre-existing car way louder than 60 is fine as long as you don't modify it. So it just makes more sense, according to the folks I've talked to set sort of a general decibel standard. And so I think that's an improvement to current law that I think is sort of driver, motorist, hobbyist friendly. And I've gotten the bills drafted up. I believe they were sent to everyone, but certainly, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, it's in your subcommittee. So if you disagree with that amendment, I look forward to hearing your views.
Okay, no, that's good. Just wanted to know the ERO part. Thanks.
Yep.
Delegate Parrott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Stewart. This good bill. I was wondering, it seems like there are a couple of different issues in one. Would you be open to splitting the bill out into separate bills if the subcommittee feels that's appropriate?
I don't really know how that works logistically. I mean, however the subcommittee wants to do it. I mean, a few of y'all have probably gotten emails about this modification of the exhaust issue, which is why we followed up on that. If somehow your subcommittee chair can figure out a way to bifurcate or trifurcate the bills and all the provisions pass, I'm not picky about how y'all do that.
Very good. Thank you.
Any further questions? I have a question. Delegate Stewart, is this provision that requires people to go into court even if they've agreed to pay the fine? Should we be doing that?
I think we should, Mr. Chairman. And I understand that right now, courts are bogged down with cases due to the coronavirus. And so I would be open to pushing that provision back into the future until courts can kind of get control of their case dockets if the subcommittee thought that was prudent. But at the end of the day,
let me ask this. Do any other states do this?
Yes. So Virginia does this. And so that's actually part of the reason that Maryland is being flooded with these speed racers, is because in Virginia, not only do they have to pay $2,500 maximum fine, but they got to go in person. So, we in Montgomery County and Prince George's in particular are being flooded by these people who want to abuse our public roadways, because if they get caught in Virginia, they get a super steep penalty and they got to go in court. But in Maryland, they don't. And the reason that you do this is because it's more of a deterrent. If these folks can just pay the ticket, like they can buy stuff on Amazon, if it's that easy for them, then it's just a slap on the wrist. They kind of view these fees as the cost of doing business. But if they have to go into court, this starts to feel more like a real thing and a real issue that we're taking seriously, and not just something that you can buy yourself out of.
Delegate Weigel has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Delegate Parrott's observation, I noticed debate expressed their opposition to this legislation, and there are some parts of it that I like, some parts I don't necessarily. Obviously, anybody who's racing on a highway deserves to get 12 points, but there's a lot of folks up here have motorcycles. They go out on drives and stuff and all, and actually some of them have bumper stickers on their vehicles that say "Loud Pipe Save Lives," because a lot of drivers are distracted these days and they just don't pay attention, but yet they'll hear the loud pipe on the motorcycle. So I guess to follow up with that, are you willing to break some of these out into different bills so we can have a choice?
Yeah, absolutely, Delegate Weibel. I appreciate the question. I know that, you know, in the committee testimony, just generally from constituents, I know the modification of the exhaust piece of this has proven to be the most controversial. I have reached out to ABATE, and I actually think that they may end up switching sides and supporting what we're doing. Because just to make it totally clear, current law already prohibits the modification of exhaust system. All the bill does is increase the fine for that pre-existing violation from $70 to $200. We got a lot of confused folks across the state emailing us thinking that we were imposing that regulation for the first time, when all we're doing is increasing the fine by $130. But after reaching out to these folks, we realized, hey, this may be a good opportunity. A lot of these people don't even realize this is in current law, but this may be a good opportunity to change current law to make it more friendly to these folks. And so we've been working with ABATE and a number of other groups now who I think that are going to come in favorable with amendments after the fact to support changes to previous law. Or support changes to current law. So basically, we'll keep the fine increase, but this decibel change was actually proposed to us by ABATE. So I think that what you'll find when we get the updated testimony is that a lot of the motorcycle enthusiasts and hobbyists actually like these amendments that we're putting in more than they like current law.
Okay, any other questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, we'll proceed to, Delegate Siliberti.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, you mentioned, Delegate, that Virginia is the other, are there any other states other than Virginia that have this particular piece of legislation?
If you're speaking about almost every state prohibits, for example, racing on highways. I think almost every state in the union, with a couple of exceptions, prohibit racing on highways. Then the matter is just like, how do they impose penalties on that? Some states are harsher than others. Virtually every state that borders us is harsher than us, which is why we become the hotbed for this activity. Now, in terms of modification of exhaust system, states do that in different ways. Almost every state in some way regulates the sound of mufflers, but some states do this fix-it ticket and this decibel level like California does. That's what ABATE wants. That's the amendment that I put in. Current law, though, is similar to sort of, I'd say, a dozen or so other states, which says that any change to a muffler that makes it louder than factory is a violation of law. So it depends on what part of the bill you're talking about. In terms of the specific point that the chairman mentioned in terms of the must appear in court, Virginia does that along with a handful of other states. And it's just a way to try to make people take this seriously.
All right, thanks.
Neil, did you have your hand up for another question or did you fail to put it down? Okay, Ann Healy then. And you need to.
There we go. Okay. Delegate Vaughn, I'm very interested in this bill because we do have a lot of these drag races happening up and down this Route 1. And in some of the other highways, they're very urban areas. And some of it happened because I think COVID got some of the extra traffic off the road, and they're using these areas as straightaways. The problem I have heard from constituents is not about what the fine is or what the penalty is, but the problem with enforcement and with catching them because they're going so fast. By the time they get reported to the police, even a small town like Hyattsville, by the time the police find them, they're up in College Park someplace. So how does this enhance enforcement?
It's a great question, Delegate Healy. And yeah, a lot of the folks I've talked to that are most concerned about this actually do live in Prince George's County. And it's a great point. And like I said, enforcement is always going to be the name of the game, but I think we can make some statutory changes to make enforcement easier. And the number one is the first point I mentioned, which is that right now in Maryland, it is not illegal to intentionally obscure your license plate to avoid speed detection. Montgomery County and Prince George's County lead the nation in speed cameras. And yet, all it takes is $30 and a trip to Amazon.com, and you can get a little bit of a deflection plate to put on top of your license plate and speed all over Prince George's and Montgomery counties till your heart's content, because the cameras are not going to pick you up. So that's the principal piece that will help enforcement. But but my other witnesses may have more to add on that piece.
Thank you.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing this bill, Delegate Stewart. I forwarded to him some complaints from my constituents who live right on the Montgomery-Prince George's line, and it is indeed a serious problem in both our counties. My question to you is based on a recommendation a constituent sent to me, wondering if it would make sense to proactively look at our emissions inspection laws. And I wondered if you had done that as a way of, instead of just this being a reaction to racing and having a police officer be in the right place at the right time and pulling someone over and writing that ticket, could our emissions inspection process be more robust with respect to these modified exhaust systems? Did you look at that? Did you think that would make any sense?
I did look at that, and I appreciate Delegate Lehman. I appreciate your partnership on this issue. I did look at that. I thought that was an interesting idea. The idea basically being that when folks get their exhaust check for emissions, they should also get the decibels check to make sure that they're compliant with law and they're not too loud. I think this is an interesting idea. I'd be, certainly if the subcommittee wants to go that route instead of more of a fix-it ticket type regime, I'm open to that. The reason I have not submitted that amendment yet and instead went with a fix-it ticket, besides the fact that that's what apparently ABATE wants, is just the fiscal note. I worry about if we make every single motorist go through a decibel check, that's going to be a pretty large expansion of the current regime, and it'll be very costly at a time where our budget is not in tip-top shape. Whereas if we were only requiring people who get a ticket to go get their decibels checked, that's something that is much more reasonable that they would obviously pay for themselves, and it would be not as burdensome. But I'm open. I mean, certainly I'm open to the more robust system. And I'm happy to draft that amendment if that's what the subcommittee would want.
I think just quickly, Mr. Chairman, that would be worth exploring. I wasn't thinking so much of the decibel system, although that makes sense as well. I was thinking of just the modified, muffler. I guess that is automatically tied to noise. But I believe right now under the emissions inspection rules that if you're found to have modified your muffler, you're given 30 days or 60 days to fix it and come back, and you don't pass until you do. I'm just wondering, did you look at those fees? Are they as high as they could be, to deter people again in the first place? Thinking, eventually when I go through emissions, I might never get caught speeding, my chance about driving at high speeds, but eventually I'm gonna have to go through emissions inspections and I could get nailed.
Yeah, no, and it's a great point. I mean, so we're increasing the fee. The fee right now is $70, which when you look at other states is laughably low. $70 is basically virtually nothing.
Okay, I think we're covering over ground that we've already traversed.
Thank you.
I see no further questions. Let's go to the witnesses. John Sang, John Townsend, Gwen Ward, Kevin Anderson, in that order. So John Sang, you have 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Barbe and Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Rockville resident John Sang, coalition. I formed, it's called the Maryland Coalition for Highway Safety, formed back in mid-2020 this summer. Our appreciation to Delegate Stewart for his attention in creating this life-saving bill. We haven't talked about lives being saved too much yet in the discussion of this bill. So I encourage you and the committee to submit a favorable report to the General Assembly. It's increasingly dangerous on Maryland roads. According to Maryland Highway Safety Office, their latest data, which aren't final, is that despite the significantly fewer highway miles driven in 2020 because of COVID, traffic deaths in the state of Maryland have still jumped by more than 6% compared to 2019. That equates to 3 people dying every 2 days, or 8.5% of the total COVID deaths in Maryland to date. So myself, when I'm driving the speed limit of 60 miles an hour on our neighboring intercounty connector, rarely do I pass anybody by. The same for I-270 and I-95. Sometimes it feels like I'm standing still being passed on the left and right. And bear in mind, I'm driving a speed limit. So it makes me wonder if speed limit signs have become like the mattress tag, words of caution that are just shrugged off. And why is this? So since this past June, the coalition's worked extremely well with MDTA and county law enforcement, as well as other offices across the state. And just as we've heard discussed a little earlier, Maryland highway laws fail to safely deter dangerous and illegal driving. Maryland needs to change its reputation from a roadways playground to that of a state where safety comes first. So we support all aspects of HB 10178, as well as the cross-filed bill in the Senate. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time and concerns, as well as your responsiveness to our recent outreach. To your colleagues, please embrace safety first in Maryland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Townsend, Manager of Public and Government Affairs for AAA Mid-Atlantic. We represent over 1 million members in the state of Maryland, and we support this legislation. We have seen more bad actors on our highways during the pandemic, and although traffic volume is increasing again across the state, there are still too many bad actors on our roadways, including too many drivers who are speeding across the state of Maryland, and also drivers who are driving impaired and intoxicated and under the influence of drugs, including opioids. And it's showing up in deadly crash statistics, and the number of persons who have died on our roadways in Maryland have increased, as John Singh mentioned a moment ago. The preliminary data shows that. Preliminary data show that, and the preliminary data also show that this is happening across the country too. So we need tougher enforcement and a greater police presence on our roadways. A minute ago, one of you mentioned the whole concept of drag racing that is occurring, and we have to crack down on that, but we have to be judicious in doing this because it's happening on our highways. Police chase and things like that can cause more deadly crashes. All of us may remember that 15 years ago, at least 8 people lost their lives in a deadly roadway crash, not in Montgomery County, but in Prince George's County. That happened on Indian Head Highway, which now has the appellation of being one of the deadliest highways on our roadways. We think that this legislation is imperative to correcting the transgressions and the bad actors we see on our roadways, and we ask you to give it a favorable report. The only great concern we have is—
Thank you so much. If you could begin to wrap up the committee.
I am finished, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next, let's go to Gwen Ward, and then after Gwen, Kevin Anderson.
I don't think Gwen is going to be able to make the call, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, that's a shame. Okay, how about Kevin Anderson?
Good afternoon, Delegate Barve and Vice Chairman and the members of the Environmental Transportation Committee. I'm Colonel Kevin Anderson, the Chief of the Maryland Transportation Authority Police. It's my pleasure to speak on behalf of the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association's Traffic Safety Committee, which I do chair. As many of you know, this is more than just nuisance. This is about saving lives. As you've already heard, in Maryland, we've seen an increase in our fatal crashes and injuries on our highways, even though our vehicle miles traveled have decreased. Quite frankly, 68 this past year, 2020, 68 people. Think about 68 people that you know that won't be there because of driving behavior. It's been my privilege to work with the Maryland Coalition for Highway Safety, the Greater Olney Civic Association, and AAA Mid-Atlantic. So the problem persists in Maryland because we don't have that deterrence that we need. We do need enhanced penalties for this. Law enforcement is engaged with the community. We continue to be engaged with the community, and we always will. But when it comes to reckless driving and participating in speed contests without that extra deterrence, it's just going to continue to happen. We support continuing to do our job, but we need your help in doing our job as well. As for the modification, it's not only about quality of life, it compounds when you add speed and racing to it. It increases that for our communities. And every one of us have been affected by it in our own communities. The registration plate manipulation or covering, it's significant. Law enforcement can't do the proper follow-ups to stop these individuals, especially in large groups, as they flee from police. As John Townsend spoke about, I don't want my police officers out engaging in high-speed pursuits, risking the lives of innocent motorists. I just don't want to do that. But I do want them to follow up vigorously to find out who's causing that problem. So on behalf of the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association's Traffic Safety Committee, we appreciate your support, and you can help us save lives on Maryland highways. I'll be glad to answer any questions that anybody may have, and especially speak about tactics that law enforcement can do additionally.
Okay. Any questions? Well, I have a question for Mr. Anderson. So you support the idea of making a person go to court even though they've agreed to pay the fine?
Yes, sir. And the reason for that is, as many of us know, if you've been in any legal system before, and certainly law enforcement and the attorneys, there is greater teeth and deterrence to somebody that has to appear before a judge than just prepaying a fine and going on about the next speed violation he or she gets, or participating in a speed contest.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, that concludes the public hearing. I believe, yeah, that's everybody who wants to testify. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 178. Delegate Stewart, why don't we take your next bill right now, 292. I understand your witnesses are in the waiting area, so we may as well clean all that up.
Okay, that sounds great. Let me just pull it up. All right. For the record, yeah, my mic's on. Okay, good. For the record, HB 292, Delegate Stewart. So in 2001, the Baltimore Sun's Michael Dresser, I'm sure some of y'all remember him, wrote an expose. 2 years earlier, the General Assembly had banned the practice of lobbyists buying dinner for legislators in a one-on-one session. But now lobbyists were paying thousands of dollars to take just a handful of legislators out to dinner. And they were just socializing. They weren't even talking about any legislative substance. Can you imagine? Then Congressman Ben Cardin said this new trend in the article, said this new trend of committee dinners violated the spirit of the 1999 ethics reforms, which he crafted. Speaker Taylor was scandalized. He said the committee dinners should be quote unquote working dinners. And Senate President Mike Miller, he wasn't pleased either. He said he'd follow up with the speaker and with any lobbyists exploiting this loophole. It's been 20 years since then. It's been 20 years since that Baltimore Sun article came out. And since then, we've gotten Facebook, we've gotten YouTube, we've gotten the iPhone, and we've even gotten cars that drive themselves. But committee dinners haven't changed. There's still no limit on how much a lobbyist can spend on a legislator's meal as long as an entire committee or delegation is invited. HB 292, the Public Integrity Act, would do two things. First, it would implement a $50 per legislator cap on committee dinners. And second, it would increase the lobbyist registration fee from $100 to $300. This second point is simply to keep pace with inflation. The fee hasn't been increased since the second Bush administration. And adequately fund the State Ethics Commission, which is underfunded despite its critical work. Lobbyists with nonprofit clients, however, could apply for a fee waiver and keep paying the current $100. Now, listen, I know firsthand, I've been to them. I know that these dinners are not evil and that they can be useful. They can provide legislators with useful information. But, however, nonprofit groups, grassroots groups, and individuals are denied equal access to legislators because they simply can't afford it. Instead, they try to spend 5 minutes of or steal 5 minutes of our time in a crowded reception room over cold sandwiches. This bill would level the playing field between deep-pocketed corporate lobbyists and everyone else. The amount of money that a group has should not determine the amount of access or the volume of their voice. Now, look, I know that introducing this bill is not going to win me any popularity contests in Annapolis, but it's the right thing to do. No matter how many legislators attended dinner, lobbyists are undeniably paying for access. And even if no legislator changes their vote based on stake, the committee dinner practice creates at least a perception of unequal access and power. We cap tangible gifts from lobbyists for this exact reason, and yet committee dinners remain the only uncapped gift in our entire ethics code. HB 292 will realign these dinners with the spirit of the 1999 ethics laws. I urge a favorable report.
Any questions for the sponsor of the bill? Delegate Wyville. Oh, no, excuse me, Delegate Boyce is first.
Thanks so much. I just want to clarify. So especially the increase of fees. So even if you're a nonprofit entity or an advocacy group, you do have to register as a lobbyist.
You do. Currently,
So you'll be raising that fee for those individuals as well?
no. So the fee raises for lobbyists who have for-profit clients. If you are a lobbyist or an advocate or some sort of registered entity representing not-for-profit entities, which encompasses of not just the IRS tax designation, but all sorts of unincorporated or whatever groups, you will continue paying the $100 fee.
So how would you manage those lobbying organizations that have clients for both for-profit and nonprofit?
This is a great question. I appreciate the chance to clarify this. Right now, lobbyists register by the client, not by the group. So, right, so if they register for one of their for-profit clients, they would pay $300. When they register for, say, a group representing animal welfare that's not for profit, they would pay $100, which is the current fee.
Thanks.
Delegate Wyville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question on how you would measure the $50 per participant, because obviously if it's a sit-down dinner, you know how much is spent on that, but some of these folks have reception. So are you measuring it based on the number of people who actually attend, or are you basing it on the number of people who are invited? How is the 50 limit? I mean, because you could attend one of these and then find out after the fact you're potentially in violation.
Right. So it's based on attendance. So not based on who you invite. So basically, we're trying to make this as easy as possible to compute. So if you compute rather. So if you have a committee dinner and you total up the total tab for that evening, you just divide it by the number of legislators who showed up, and that is your $50 per legislator fee.
So if 20 people are invited, the guy throwing the reception expects those 20 to show up and only 5 show up, but he still got the price of the room, reservation, everything else, and there it ends up being $100 per attendee. Does the representative have the opportunity to then pay the 50, or how's it work?
So there's no situation where the representative would be paying the 50. I mean, they could certainly pay upfront themselves when they attend the dinner, but you raise a good point that I'd like to clarify. This doesn't have to do with room rental or a location rental. This is just a gift cap that exists in the ethics code for meals and beverages. So it would not include the room rental fee or anything like that. It would just be if you show up and you pay, then it's capped.
I'm confused even more then, because you said you would take the total cost divided by the number of attendees. If you take the total cost of the person putting on the event is going to be everything, the price of the room, the price of the food. Maybe it's something that's worked out in regulation after the bill is passed potentially. I just think it's confusing.
Sure, I'm sure that there's an opportunity to clarify it if you think it's confusing, but basically usually when you pay for a meal, you get a bill, you get a receipt for the food and the beverages consumed, and then there's a separate fee for the room reservation. So you would be using the bill, the receipt for what was actually purchased in terms of meals, food and beverages. You would not add the room rental, but if that was somehow added to the receipt, then it would be a simple math equation. You would just delete the room rental fee and then do the math.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Stewart, just a couple of real quick questions. One, I'd like to know how'd you come up with the $50, the limit on the for the food? And secondly, don't you think that this could affect the smaller groups even just as much? Because let's use, for instance, the Del Mar, the chicken dinner, the poultry industry. By the time they host as many people as they do over in the Senate building, and they bring in caterers to cook the food and serve the food and things like that, the cost could very easily be over $50 a person. I mean, I don't know how many events you've had catered, over the years, but it could very easily, with just minor stuff, go over $50 a person by the time you pay everything. So, have you thought about that? And how did you come up with just the $50?
Both really good questions, Delegate Clark. I appreciate that. I came up with $50 by speaking with a bunch of lobbyists off the record. You notice that there's no opposition. There are no lobbyists testifying opposed to this. Part of that is I've talked to several of them and tried to get a reasonable figure of how much they normally pay for these dinners.
By the way, one lobbyist is signed up in opposition.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I got an obsolete list. But basically what I'm trying to do here, Delegate Clark, is to preserve the status quo. I'm not trying to end the practice of dinners because, like I said, I think they can play a useful role. And if the subcommittee, which I serve with you on, Delegate Clark, if it's somehow determined from hearing from other lobbyists who I haven't talked to that actually have lowballed this number, and we need to increase it to something like $75 or $100 to make it more realistic with what current practices are, I'm absolutely open to that. But after talking with some lobbyists, they said, listen, we pay about $50. Sometimes there are these, extravagant situations where we've heard of people paying upwards of $350 or $450 per legislator. And so my goal is just to cap this at something that's reasonable and that's currently done to try to weed out these extreme cases of a handful of legislators showing up to a dinner and then buying booze, drink after drink after drink and steak after steak and side order after side order and not actually discuss any legislation whatsoever. I don't think that really happens in our committee. Obviously, we're not invited to very many of these, but it happens according to the folks I've talked to.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is talk about policy after 6 o'clock. Jerry, did he answer your question?
Yeah, he answered my question, but I don't think he's going to get invited to too many dinners.
They've got to invite me. That's the beauty of the current law. They got to invite the whole committee.
Right. Before I recognize Delegate Healy, I have a question. So if somebody invites all the members of the Environment and Transportation Committee out to a dinner and plans to spend $50 and just one person doesn't show up, then they'd be in violation, wouldn't they?
No. So it would purely be based on how many people show up. And so if 4 people show up, then your budget for the dinner is $200. That's the most that you could spend. Otherwise, the legislators would have to pick up the difference if the bill goes over.
Delegate Healy has a question.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to, getting away from the dinners where you get presented a bill at the end of the evening to a catered event, a reception, because a lot of times on Monday evenings, there are multiple receptions going on and legislators show up because maybe their constituents are there or people from their district that have a concern that it's their opportunity to talk to us. And they may not consume anything. They may go from one reception to another, and they get counted as, having some kind of big $50 dinner over and over and over again, and they may not have eaten even one meatball. So I'm just not sure the logistics of how you make these definitions work.
Well, what I was thinking of in the reception context, and Delegate Healy, I appreciate that, is basically if a legislator shows up to a reception, you can count them towards your overall budget. So if you basically count the number of legislators who walk into your big conference room, and you don't necessarily have to monitor, how many ate this sandwich versus that sandwich, but you do generally keep track of when legislators come in because you either sign them in or they register, or at least you're sort of checking them off. So you just take that list of the legislators that came, and then you multiply that number by 50, and that's your budget for the event. However, I do take your point that it is more challenging to keep track of how many legislators attend in a crowded reception area where people are wandering in and out than it is a dinner. And so, if that is a difficulty, is sort of a computation difficulty that the subcommittee decides is just too difficult to take on, I'm open to some sort of exemption for receptions just based on, being unable to calculate that. Because like I said, I think that the actual ethical issues that we're dealing with here are most present in super, super expensive dinners, sit-down dinners. I'm not necessarily trying to go after receptions. So if we need to exempt them, I'm open to that.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to the logistics again and the question of the invited versus attending. You know, when you arrange for catering, you usually have to give the caterer a head count in advance. And so your budget is going to be based on the head count that you give the caterer. And let's say it snows or something and only a small percentage of the people actually show up, then you would be in violation. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how that could be addressed. I think this is a great idea, but I think there are some logistical issues that have to be worked out.
Yeah, it's a great point about catering. Like I said, this is mostly crafted in the context of people going and ordering food once they arrive. So you know how many people are there and then you can budget accordingly. It's a great point that, you know, sometimes you have to know in advance. I'd be open to an amendment that says, for example, you do it based on the number of RSVPs you have to catering events, but you do it in sit-down events, you do it based on the number of people that show up. You know, I think these are all really good points that I've tried to think through, but obviously the wisdom of the committee collectively is far, far greater than my wisdom alone. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you in subcommittee or in full committee to work these problems out. I don't think that they're impossible to overcome, but certainly I think that, you know, we can have a catering exception or a reception exception for things that are more difficult to calculate. I'm really thinking about the sit down context, which is pretty easy to figure out.
Delegate Harrison. Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had to unmute. You know, I don't know that this necessarily warrants a response, but you know, we're being recorded, and I don't want the public to think that all we do is sit up there and not meet with smaller organizations who want to meet with us, and all we want to do is get you know, some dinner from some lobbyists. Because what you said earlier was that some of those smaller nonprofits may not have the same opportunity and access. And I think that for everyone that I've met anyway, all of my colleagues here, if an individual or an organization wants to meet with us about something, I think we're all open to meeting with them. So I don't want anybody to think that we're not meeting with smaller organizations just because they're a smaller organization or a nonprofit. I just felt a need to put that out there, because what it does is it puts us in a bad light when members of the public hear something like that and they don't understand the full context of how we actually work and we operate. Thank you.
Can I respond, Mr. Chairman, or no?
No, it was a rhetorical question. Let's go on to Delegate Terraza.
So going back to the point I think Delegate Healy was making about the receptions, I was just wondering if you had thought about sort of the distinction there that oftentimes those are open to the general public, or at least those who are in the building there. So a lot of times at those receptions, I run into some of those smaller groups that Delegate Harrison was talking about. So I wind up talking to all sorts of different groups about, you know, they could be small groups, they could be individuals, they could be all sorts of people. And I'll see those at those receptions. Those are open to anyone, not just the committee. So had you given some thought, this is a question, I guess, to that distinction?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly an interesting one, right? Where, you know, the public can obviously there's public access to the building, you know, in normal non-COVID times. And then the public, in some of these instances, it's true, the public can just wander in these conference rooms and grab a sandwich or whatever. I think that's a great point. I think that actually could make drafting some sort of exemption pretty easy, because we could say, well, if you invite members of the entire public to whatever event you're having, be it a dinner or a reception, then you're exempt from this requirement as well.
Right, because I mean, I rarely get to eat at those, and I would hate to avoid those receptions for fear of having to pay for a meal that I didn't eat, when it's really, I go because I want to see my constituents, or I want to see, I want to show up for some of those organizations, but also for all the constituents that I get to run into there. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
I think Delegate Jacobs has a question. Jay, you learned how to use the hand up function.
Yeah, I was wondering, Mr. Chairman, did you see that hand?
I was Well, at first I assumed it wasn't you because it was a hand up function in Zoom.
Yeah, I've been going like this, so
Yeah, no, well, go ahead. You got the floor.
every day there's a little more advancement. So anyhow, Delegate Stewart, I scanned this bill real quick and maybe it's in there, maybe I just missed it. But what about gratuity on these fees?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that in general, tax and gratuity is not included. Like, for example, there's a gift cap when lobbyists give us tangible things. That's why we get all these sort of like relatively cheap, nominally priced gifts. Tax, there's no gratuity, obviously, when you buy something like that, but tax isn't included. So I would imagine gratuity, that's something that I would probably want to ask Dia Daly in subcommittee, but I would assume that gratuity is not included. It's just the pure price, the menu price of the food and the beverages.
All right, because certainly gratuity is part of a meal typically, so or any other event. So I just would wonder. I didn't notice it. I just wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions for the Delegate Silberti? Barry, you need to unmute yourself. Just
basically, I find some of this position insulting. Okay, I have been involved in dinners by the optometrists, the ophthalmologists. I went in there with a particular point of view, and I can assure you the arguments were valid on both sides. But my position was not swayed by a filet mignon. It was swayed by facts. And I think, I don't know of anybody, quite frankly, maybe some of you do, who have been taken out to dinner, and because of the quality of the dinner, they went from a yes, no vote. So, and I could go on and on, but time's short. But in any event, I find it insulting. We're better than that. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Silberti. I would just say that I don't at all mean this to be an insult. In fact, I stated that in my initial testimony that I don't think anyone's vote is being decided by the quality or the existence of a filet mignon. I don't think that at all. But at the same time, almost every state caps gifts from lobbyists for a reason, and it's because of the public perception of impropriety. Not that I think that anyone's doing anything wrong or not meeting with constituents or only meeting with lobbyists or taking free meals because they're sort of corrupt or whatever. I'm not alleging that whatsoever. I've been to plenty of these dinners myself, but there's only one example in the entire ethics code where a lobbyist gift is uncapped, and it's this. And I think that they tried to fix it in 1999, and it seems like, so now Senator Cardin, then Senate President Mike Miller, then Speaker Cass Taylor, all thought that the current arrangement, the current status quo, was a perversion of what they were trying to do in 1999. And this bill is simply trying to put it back to what they were trying to do.
I hear you. Thanks.
Any further questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, let's go to Vince Johnson, who is from San Antonio, Texas, and he's testifying on this bill. Mr. Johnson, you have 2 minutes. Johnson there?
He appears to be in the chat, and he may have stepped out. I can try to ping him while someone else testifies.
Well, the next person testifying is an opponent to the bill, and I don't like to go back to, the reason we have these.
I am here.
There we go. There you go,
Okay.
Vince.
I
Okay, 2 minutes.
apologize. Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Vincent. For decades, I have written and taught. I earned my law degrees at Notre Dame, at Yale, and at the London School of Economics. After I passed the bar in Pennsylvania, I worked for judges in New York and Chicago, and I now hold an endowed professorship at St. Mary's University in San Antonio. Task Force on Ethics in Government. The purpose of regulating lobbyists is to ensure that and the government enjoys the confidence of the people. When lobbyists both a risk and an appearance of impropriety. The risk is that the lobbyist client will the offering will subtly induce the official to make decisions calculated to repay the favor. Even if the recipient, there is a public perception that the lobbyist client enjoys an unfair advantage. The appearance tends, and that makes democracy less effective. A lavish dinner hosted by lobbyists is no less ethically offensive merely because all invited to attend. It still appears that the party footing the bill enjoys privilege. Expenditures on food and beverages at $50 would help to mitigate the risks and the appearances of impropriety. I recommend that House Bill 290.
Okay, Mr. Johnson is the only witness signed up in favor. We have somebody favorable with amendment, so I'll get to them next, but any questions for Mr. Johnson? Okay, actually, Delegate, I have a question for you. You've raised the issue of the appearance of impropriety, but it's interesting. There are a lot of people who feel that the fact that we don't have voter ID raises the appearance of voter fraud in the minds of several people. Should we be basing legislation on public perception, or should we be basing it on what's actually happening?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, certainly in our ethics code currently, we base it on appearance and an existence of impropriety. That phrase, the appearance of impropriety, the appearance of wrongdoing, is littered throughout our ethics code. It would probably take dozens of bills to remove it entirely. The reason that idea exists is legislators are not always the best at evaluating, the circumstances that they're in. And we want there to be public trust in government. At the end of the day, we want the public to trust that based on what they know or hear is happening in the legislature, that they know that we're doing the right thing. And that's why virtually every state caps lobbyist gifts. I can't, obviously, I don't know based on a poll how many would think this was improper versus not, just like I don't know how many people of a given state think that voter ID is improper or not. But the appearance of impropriety is a very long standard dating back centuries in, I think, both common law, English common law, and in American jurisprudence.
Okay, signed up favorable with amendments, Christy Demnow. You know what, Christy, you're going to have to pronounce your last name for me. I'm going to butcher it.
Sure, that's fine. It's Demnowitz. So thank you, Chairman Barve, Vice Chairman Stein, and members of the committee. My name, again, is Christy Demnowitz, and I am the chair of Represent Maryland, which is a all-volunteer, unfunded, grassroots pro-democracy organization, or anti-corruption, if you prefer. And we are in support of this bill with a few amendments. But first, I wanted to talk about the dinners that everybody's talking about. So we actually get the protocol calendar that goes out each week from Deborah Cleary, I think is her name. And we've been getting it for the past 3 years. And every week we share on social media the number of dinners that are happening. And every week there's a half a dozen dinners at Luna's and Ruth's Chris and some other restaurants around the area. And so we actually one year decided to go to some of these dinners and just watch who goes in and out. And it was really shocking, the number of people that go from Ruth's Chris to Luna's on the same night. And so when we talk about these dinners, they do give access to lawmakers that average citizens, grassroots organizers, nonprofits don't have, because we can't afford a big Ruth's Chris or Luna's tab. So I want to say that there is absolutely a different level of access if you have a bigger budget. So capping the amount at $50, it's not going to end the dinner, but it might lessen the amount of time spent with a lawmaker and a lobbyist spent together in one of these restaurants. I've only had the privilege of eating at Luna's once, and it was delicious, but I can't afford it, and none of my friends can afford it. So for so long, government has had a priority of businesses, prioritizing businesses and tax exemptions for businesses and laws that help businesses.
You probably ought to get to your amendments because you have 17 seconds left.
Oh, I don't see the timer anywhere on my screen. I apologize. Okay, so basically we think that the 300 is too low. It should be 1,000. Comcast pack, Verizon pack, Amazon pack, Pfizer pack, they can all afford $1,000. We can't. And last, we would absolutely support striking the catered events from this and deal with that later, but it's really the dinners that make the difference right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Christy? No? Okay, we'll go to the last oral witness, and that's Bruce Bariano, signed up in opposition. Bruce, you have the floor for 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Bruce Bariano. I'm a registered lobbyist, been associated with the legislature for 50 years and have a good view on the legislative process here in Annapolis. Very respectfully, I find this bill insensitive, very biased and prejudiced, and I would agree with Delegate Ciliberti, very offensive. Let me take the second part of the bill first, and that is increasing the lobbyist registration 300%. There's no justification for it. You don't see the State Ethics Commission coming in here asking for this. This is a tax on lobbyists that run businesses, and there's no justification for this whatsoever. As to the other provisions, the front part of the provisions, if you look, Mr. Chairman, at page 3 of the bill, lines 3 through 12, that was an amendment that was put on the ethics bill when it was passed originally by Delegate John Arnick, may he rest in peace, who you know well. And this allows for out of session, you can have meals with legislators as long as that's in the jurisdiction of the legislator and it's paid for by the client, not the lobbyist. And to put a cap on it, you're very insensitive to the restaurants and the bars and the taverns in this COVID time period. There is just no justification for this. And I'm not trying to be rude and disrespectful. I met with Delegate Stewart when he got elected. He seems like a nice, fine young man, but his views are just 2 years in Annapolis. And it takes a while to really understand.
Mr. Bariano, I don't think we want to be questioning the wisdom of members.
No, I'm not. It's his prerogative. It's his prerogative, and I recognize that. But the whole tone of the bill is saying that lobbyists are bad and evil and even corrupt. And it's like asking for a remedy when there's no problem. And, lobbyists are doing their job. And the lobbyists that I know are ethical, and they're hardworking, and they're law-abiding. And this whole bill and the tenor of it is that we're bad people. And we're not bad people. And there's no evidence and no justification for this bill, certainly from a business standpoint, of the restaurants and the bars and the taverns have enough difficulty staying alive and staying afloat doing something like this. And you're going to have legislators that are going to be caught in awkward situations because there's no amendments that can deal with the vagueness and the uncertainty of this bill. I would urge an unfavorable report. It is a looking for a problem, and there is no problem. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions there may be.
Any questions? The sponsor has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Bariano, for joining us this afternoon. First, I don't mean any offense whatsoever to your profession. Like I said before, I think lobbyists play a very crucial role in our democracy. But I just had a couple questions. The idea that, some of the points you were making. Number one, as you pointed out that obviously during this pandemic era that restaurant and bars are hurting, and I'm sensitive to that certainly. But, gyms, for example, are also hurting. Would you be supportive of us amending the law to allow lobbyists to pay for unlimited gym memberships for, say, 3 years for every member of the committee?
I can't answer that because it's really not relevant to the bill. Respectfully, if you're sensitive to bars and taverns at this difficult time, why are you putting this bill in? I don't know anything about gyms or what have you. That kind of a question diverts from the issue of this bill, respectfully.
Okay. I don't want to get argumentative, so I won't respond to that specifically. But what I will say is, would you be in favor of doing away with the $25 cap on tangible gifts from lobbyists?
It's been in place for a long time. The lobbyists are used to it. Everyone is used to it. There's no need to change that at all. And I'm not advocating that whatsoever.
But you don't find the current cap offensive or somehow defamatory of lobbyists? Because we're basically just
No, because no, I don't. No, I don't.
So what's the difference between a tangible
Okay,
object?
I think we now are venturing into the territory of argumentative situation here. So why don't we just, you can discuss it offline, and I'd like to, Mr. Bariano will be the last witness for this bill, and we will proceed to the next bill on the.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to House Bill 285, Delegate Robin Lewis. Robin, welcome back to your home committee.
Mr. Chair, it's a pleasure. Can you hear me and see me?
I can see you and the Golden Gate Bridge.
It was the best background image I could muster. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, esteemed and beloved members of Environment and Transportation. Delegate Robin Lewis, it's great to come before you in support of House Bill 285. Let me introduce the bill by saying first, you've seen and heard this before. This bill, which will create a work group on statewide vehicle crash data collection and reporting, was introduced in 2020. You heard this bill on March 5th of last year. You may remember that was the day Governor Hogan announced the first confirmed COVID cases in the state and then issued the emergency, situation. And I think the timing of the bill hearing put us at a disadvantage. Although I think you guys were pretty favorably disposed, there just wasn't time to give this bill the attention it so richly deserves. I'd like to also bring to your attention that after I dropped this bill in the hopper, I was contacted by two organizations that wish to request amendments. I'm supportive of those amendments. Those groups are the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association and the Maryland Sheriff's Association, as well as the American Automobile Association. So please know that in advance. You may not see their letters in your file at this moment, but they're coming and I'm supportive. Back to the bill. It creates a work group that will bring together the key stakeholders responsible to figure out how to measure race and ethnicity in non-fatal vehicle crashes. Non-fatal vehicle crash is an incident involving a car or truck and a human being that result in injury but are not fatal. Right now in Maryland, we simply don't collect racial or ethnic data on non-fatal crashes. If there is a fatal incident, death records indicate race and ethnicity. If a person is walking along the street and sideswiped or knocked from their bicycle, there's really no way in the state of Maryland to know if there's a disparate impact or an uneven, disproportionate effect on racial minorities. I'm sure you'll agree with me that doesn't make sense. We know from data nationwide that Native Americans, African Americans, Latinx, people of Hispanic descent, are most likely to be injured when walking. They're most likely to be hit by cars. It's a robust literature confirming, validating that. They are more likely to be harmed when crossing the street or riding a bicycle. And the reasons for this are many, but unless you measure who's getting hurt, when and where, you've no way to fix it. I will not linger too much on the rationale for this legislation. I will say that although last year we had a $0 fiscal note, this year the Department of Legislative Services is estimated.
You've gotten to your, you've gotten through your 4 minutes. So if you could wrap.
Oh, you guys only give 4.
Yeah.
Well, in HGO, we enjoy 5 full minutes, but out of respect, I will end there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Actually, well, why don't I ask you a question? What was your reason for putting in the bill? When I first, for some reason, I don't remember it from last year. I guess I was a little preoccupied, but yeah, what is, can you give us a quick summation of put the bill in?
Well, think of it this way, and Delegate Weigel will like this rationale. What gets measured matters. Things that we count, count. If we're not paying attention to racial and ethnic impact, we have no way of understanding what the conditions are. And if there's a disparate impact, we have no way to fix them because we don't know who's getting harmed. This is true in other dimensions of health and environment and the economy. We know, for example, how many African-American owned businesses shut down during COVID. Well, that means that with that information, we can direct supports to that business community. Same thing goes with health and epidemiological data.
Okay.
Maryland's one of the few states that doesn't collect this information.
Okay. Any questions for the sponsor? Well, I don't see any raised hands anywhere, so you're off scot-free there, Robin. Let's go to the first witness signed up in favor, Tammy Bresnahan. Tammy, welcome back to the committee.
Happy New Year, everyone. It's good to be back and it's good to see you. I am Tammy Bresnahan. I'm the Director of Advocacy for AARP Maryland. And full disclosure, I am a registered lobbyist. So just wanted to throw that out there. This is an issue that AARP has long promoted transportation options for older adults nationally and at the state and local level. Older adults are more likely to experience challenges seeing, hearing, or moving. And if the trends are any indication, we are not devoting nearly enough time, enough programs or needs for older adults. We have worked with Delegate Robin Lewis in Baltimore City. We actually are very supportive of complete streets, safe streets. I've been in here many times talking about, you know, the safety of streets because older people walk more. And we know that according to the AARP public policy between 2008 and 2017, Black and or African-American people were 72% more likely to be struck and killed by a driver than people of other races. And so I agree with Delegate Lewis that we should be looking at this. You know, there aren't places for people to walk in the city, and even in urban areas, there are very little, and people who drive cars believe that they have the right of way, unfortunately. You know, my own brother at 60 years old, a Vietnam vet, was crossing the street in 2007 and was struck and killed by a 54-year-old driver. And, you know, I have been, and it was ruled his fault because he didn't cross at a crosswalk. And you'll see in part of my testimony about crosswalks, it was ruled pedestrian error, but there are no crosswalks on that road, which is a major thoroughfare in Pasadena. And lots of communities, lots of schools come off of that road. So we are supportive of anything that creates safer or will give us more information about how we can create safer streets for our older population. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is a person with a really lovely African name that I cannot pronounce. If you would, Anakwenze, if you're there, I would love for you to explain to me how to pronounce your name.
You did a good job. It's Anakwenze Obwe.
Okay, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Barbe, Vice Chairman Stein, and committee members. My name is Anakwenze Obwe, and I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I live in the 43rd District in Baltimore City. I support House Bill 285, Work Group on Statewide Vehicle Crash Data Collection and Reporting, As a transportation engineer, I've worked throughout my career to improve traffic safety in our state. Unfortunately, the number of traffic crashes that result in injuries and fatalities remains unacceptably high. To make matters worse, traffic crash statistics in Maryland are missing key demographic indicators for race and ethnicity. This means that transportation and public health practitioners in Maryland cannot determine how crashes are impacting specific racial and ethnic groups, and we can't use that context to prepare effective remedies. For example, when crash data is isolated by age, we can assess whether the impacts on youth or elderly populations are severe, and we can also develop context-sensitive solutions for them. Therefore, I ask that the committee moves this bill favorably so a work group of key agencies and experts can determine how to do this in Maryland. Thank you, and I'll take your questions or any comments.
Thank you very much. I don't think anybody else has signed up to testify in favor, so I'm going to go to questions. Any questions for the last two presenters? Well, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on, nobody else. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 285. Let's proceed to House Bill 291. Delegate Krim, welcome back to the Environment and Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that you recall I was in your committee the other day, and I do apologize for being back, but I do have this very important bill, and it's about video tolls. And I know that you've been hearing other bills on this topic, but what this bill is about reducing the fine for people who have failed to pay their toll. Now, as we know, once you go onto a roadway that is being tolled by video and you don't have an easy pass, you get a bill in the mail from the Maryland Transportation Authority. If you don't pay that within 30 days, then you are assessed a penalty for not paying that. Now, and it was $50. A couple years ago, that was changed. So going forward, that penalty is now $25. What my bill does is it makes that change retroactive, because it's a look back, so that people who incurred these penalties, and I will say a lot of them occurred on the ICC. So you delegates from Montgomery County, I would think you have some constituents in this area of people who have unpaid tolls, because in the beginning, when the ICC was first opened, people were using this roadway and they didn't understand how video tolling was working, and they incurred these penalties and they got these bills later. And then they incurred penalties for not paying them. So this is a way for us to look back. During the pandemic, we have had lots of families in financial distress. This would be one way, one small way for us to lift some of that burden from families and perhaps allow them to pay their outstanding debt, improve their credit rating, or perhaps come up with a way to pay this outstanding debt that is not so insurmountable anymore. So it's a very simple bill. You've already supported it going forward. This takes it going backward to people who perhaps maybe were unaware of how all that tolling was working in the beginning. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't go over my time today. I'm right in there. So thank you very much.
Well, before I recognize the people who want to ask questions, I just want to state for the record that my constituents from Gaithersburg and Rockville are smart enough to set their speed to 9 miles an hour over the speed limits. They're strictly at 69 miles an hour and they never get tickets. So with that, Delegate Jacobs is the first question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's 12 miles an hour over on the Eastern Shore.
Right, and coal roll.
No, they had to shut down the coal rolling club. Delegate Krim, it's my understanding that when it comes to increasing and decreasing toll rates and penalties, that the responsibility actually rests with the Maryland Transportation Authority, who's governed by a board. And I remember this from years ago when we were fighting the Bay Bridge increase, toll increases. But I see in the fiscal note that this bill would result in MDTA foregoing $162 million in lost revenue. And keeping in mind this money's owed to MDTA by violators who chose to use the toll facilities but chose not to pay their fair share of service. So, like you indicated earlier in your testimony, MDTA board unanimously voted to lower the civil penalty for all violations to $25, which took effect, I believe, last July 1st, July 20.
Yes.
And the civil penalty, as I checked into this, is used to offset additional transaction costs that are incurred for toll violators, such as certifying the citation, license plate image, working with other state MVAs for all out-of-state toll users, issuance of citations, multiple required mailings, and court processing and appearances. So the $25 civil penalty really does align closely with current and anticipated costs, according to what I understand. So, my concern is if the General Assembly goes down this road of legislating these changes, we'll find ourselves back here every year having to vote on legislation adjusting toll penalties for the cost of doing business. So, is that what we really want to do, is go back to this way of doing business? I mean, do you agree with my concerns?
Yeah, well, not totally, because you're assuming that all those people are going to pay those bills. And up till now, they haven't paid them. So there could be a reason why, and it could be because they're too insurmountable, as I said in my testimony. So I think that $50 was too much. I recall getting briefed on this. We get briefed on this in my subcommittee in appropriations. And from the very beginning, there were problems with people incurring these fines on the ICC and then ending up in the central collection unit for not paying their fines. So I think it's right now, I think government should be looking for ways to help our families get through this time. And because going forward, we have reduced that penalty, I think it's only right that we do the same for people up to the date when we reduced it. And again, it's a small way for us to help families in this particular pandemic time.
Well, I'm not at all against helping families, by no means. But we just reduced it. We cut it in half a year ago. It hadn't even been a year yet. It went into effect July 1st. And to forego $162 million, we have an obligation, to keep the MDTA, keep the facilities running as well. So, I mean, it's not a small thing to forego $162 million.
No, I do agree with you on that, but there is no way to guarantee they're going to get that money. They haven't gotten it up till now. This is no different from a tax amnesty plan.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where they are. I don't know where they are in the collection.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jay, why don't we go on to the other people who have questions, and if you want to go back, we'll come back to you. Delegate Boyce has the next question.
Thank you. I just want to say, Delegate Krim, thank you. And isn't it so that $50 on a toll that usually is $6 is, first of all, way too much?
Yes, I definitely agree with.
And wouldn't you say, or wouldn't you agree that There are probably some instances where folks are not getting the bill in time within the 30 days to be able to pay the actual toll in time, and therefore incurring a $25 or $50 late fee.
That very well could have happened, and I would suggest it did.
And I would argue to Delegate Jacobs' point to say you're foregoing money based on folks paying a late fee. Isn't that so?
Sorry, what kind of fee?
So in other words, the money that we're foregoing and not collecting these fees are based on the fact that we essentially want people or making money off of people paying a $50 or $25 fee on a toll that sometimes is only $6.
That's correct. So the toll incurred is a small percentage of what the fee ends up being. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to Delegate Parrott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate Krim, for this important bill. I did have a question for you. I did hear that a lot of people just haven't paid them. These are older bills that need to be paid. I wonder if we could, if you'd be open to having a time limit, like maybe 6 months from when you get this notice. If you pay within 6 months, we're going to drop that fee way down. But if you don't pay, then it goes back up.
So you're talking like something like what I just said, like a tax amnesty plan. So you have like a year to pay your back taxes, to clear the books, so to speak.
Exactly.
And then if you don't take advantage, then the tax is put back on the books. So if the committee wishes to go in that direction, that's fine. I would not be opposed to that.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Otto. Delegate Otto, need to unmute yourself. Charles, you need to unmute yourself. Charles.
There I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. By the way, just for everybody, all you have to do is hold down the space bar like I am right now, and that'll unmute you for while you're holding it down.
I tried that before and it didn't work, but
you and your Eastern Shore laptop.
Well, this says it's property of the Maryland General Assembly. So,
are you unmuted?
I can hear him grumbling. Go
yeah,
on.
we'll go from here. Well, I have issues about the tolls and this, that, and the other. I always paid it going by cash when I crossed the bridge, and I tried to keep myself from crossing the bridge too often. It was always free to go home, but we'll go back to this bill.
That would be nice.
Dealing with the revenue that needs to pay for the ICC, it looks like to me. But
you mean that road that Governor Early?
Yeah, and
after him.
Yeah, I haven't been on it, and I think it's probably a good thing. So
am I supposed to respond, Delegate Otto?
No, you're not.
I would be.
So Delegate Krim, what are you trying to do here with this bill?
Well, following up on my good friend Delegate Boyce, I'm going to say that we need to make it fair. We have an unfair system. I'm just trying to correct a little bit of that, trying to take some pressure off our families and trying to get them back on track. This could be hurting them in a credit rating. This could be hurting them in order to purchase a home.
So what's unfair?
The fact that we charged $15 for an unpaid toll that could have only been a very small fraction of that $50. Do you think that's fair for a government to charge that amount of money on an unpaid toll? I'm not asking you a question, Delegate Otto. It's Richard.
Now, did they take their registration away or give them a mess trying to renew their license?
Well, I think perhaps there's another bill on that topic coming through, but I would say that charging $50 for something that's maybe only a $6 to $10 toll is unfair. And I think it's unfair for a government to do that.
Well, I think we got a lot of common ground on this bill, and but I don't think this bill is going to fix it. So we'll leave it at that. And thank you for your sponsorship of it and bringing it forth.
Thank you, Delegate.
Well, I totally misread where you were on that bill. Okay, any further questions for the sponsor of the bill? Seeing none, we'll proceed to Chrissy Demnowitz, Franz Schneiderman, Christopher Dews, and that's it. Okay, Christy, you're up next.
Hi. Yes, hi. Thank you again. I see a timer now. Again, my name is Christy Demnowitz. For this bill, I'm actually just an independent voter, not on behalf of an organization. But I'm not sure if the committee remembers, I worked with Delegate Carr on a similar bill last year. And I think it's important to remind the committee that the Easy Pass system for the past decade has been run by a private company called Conduent. It's not run by the state. And there have been tons of problems with how it's been run. Billing issues are numerous on record. There's poor signage at tolls. So when people go through a toll and don't have cash or their Easy Pass doesn't work for some reason, like the battery died, then there's nothing that tells them the process to take care of that toll. And then when you add on to that, that maybe they don't get their bill because there's been tons of billing issues, they don't have an opportunity to pay the toll before the fine is assessed. I want to thank Delegate Krim for introducing this bill because it's very important, especially now that tons of people are out of work and are dealing with COVID-related issues, and then they still have this following them. So Governor Hogan did reduce the fine moving forward, and I think it's important that we also apply that retroactively to people who have been unfairly treated by Conduent via Easy Pass for the past 10 years. So I hope that the committee will find this bill favorable. I think that Delegate Parrott's idea of having a time frame is very reasonable. 6 months to a year is incredibly reasonable, and that it will be up to members of the public to make sure that their friends and family know about it to take advantage of it. But there are people with thousands and tens of thousands of dollars of Easy Pass debt, and it follows you everywhere. So it's important that this is addressed, especially now during COVID. And I hope that the fiscal note wouldn't impede this because a lot of this stuff should never have been accrued in the first place if the billing practices had been better. Thank you to the committee, and I'll take any questions.
Well, for some reason, my unmute button wasn't working. Okay, Franz Schneiderman.
Thank you, Chairman Barbe, Delegate Krim, for the opportunity to speak to this bill. My name is Franz Schneiderman. I work with a group called Consumer Auto that works on fairness, safety, and transparency issues for Maryland drivers and car buyers. We support HB 291 because we think it helps provide some needed and fair relief to a lot of people who are struggling with debt as a result of the high fees that Maryland has been charging for toll violations for some years. Now, as I and many other advocates have talked about, those fees did create, a difficult debt situations for a lot of Marylanders, particularly lower income Marylanders. I'm glad the state finally reduced the fees to $25, which strikes me as fairer. But of course, a lot of people still face large debt burdens as a result of the fines they accrued under the earlier rules. And of course, these fees do tend to fall on lower income Marylanders because they're less likely to have Easy Passes or less likely to have credit cards to automatically replenish their accounts, less likely to be able to pay the toll fees they get in the mail. So, these debts do put financial pressure on struggling Marylanders. There's a lot of money outstanding. I think, and to try to collect that money, I think it's more than $320 million at this point, plus the 17% collection fees would really put, more financial pressure on a lot of struggling Marylanders. And also it just, so this bill would relieve some of that pressure by cutting the fines in half. And, also it just seems fair to me at this point to make the outstanding fees consistent with the fairer fees that we're currently charging. Just quickly to Delegate Jacobs's point, there is a lot of money outstanding for the state here, but a lot of it, how much of it is the state really going to collect? Of course, there are costs of collection. A lot of that money will never be collected. So to just say that that's $160 million lost for the state, I think that's an exaggeration. But I do think this is fair and helpful to a lot of Marylanders who are under financial pressure, and ask you to give the bill a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, next is Christopher Dews. Mr. Dews.
All right, thank you, committee members and my established colleagues for actually making all of my talking points before I could even get to them. My name is Christopher Dews. I'm a policy advocate for the Job Opportunities Task Force, and our mission is to help lower wage workers advance to higher wage jobs. And one of the ways that we do that is through policy advocacy. And one of the things that we did in 2018 was release a report called The Criminalization of Poverty, where we discuss the different ways in which Maryland laws can actually impoverish the poor. And one of the ways that we discovered was through mostly fines and fees. Now, video toll roads, it doesn't seem like something that necessarily lines up with criminal justice, but as we all know, driving on an unregistered license can have one incarcerated. And I believe Delegate Carr's bill already addressed that, which I believe came to this committee earlier this month. So specifically looking at this piece of legislation, we agree with everything that it says, going back retroactively, reducing the fines and fees because people just can't afford it. Many people, for example, in our constituency are driving, let me just say it like this, are housing unstable. So the mail that may actually go through to that vehicle doesn't actually go to where their actual home address is. So they never actually get the mail that will tell them that they actually owe this fine. And of course it balloons and balloons and balloons. And this was before the great drop down in, I believe it was July of 2020. So we like this legislation. We think it'll be good to relieve the burdens that are already on Maryland workers and Maryland families. 47% of Marylanders, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, drive cross county for their employment. The ICC, as you guys already know, also going up north as well. So we just see this as a way to not burden Maryland workers as much. I do want to acknowledge one last point before I close, and that is that Massachusetts and Pennsylvania specifically charges $5 for each late charge, and Massachusetts charges $1, just $1 for those toll charges. So just something to consider. We're trying to bring it down to 25, and to many other states that's already egregious, and that's just something that I think we should consider as we talk about this legislation. So with that, we urge a favorable report for this piece of legislation, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have a question from Delegate Jacobs.
Yes, I just got a quick follow-up for the sponsor or any of them that testified. Much of this money is owed from out-of-state violators. And so, how would you respond to the fact that the other states don't forgive Marylanders? So in this legislation, we would be forgiving money from out-of-state money that's owed to us. So where's the fairness in that?
Okay, so I can respond to that, Delegate. As we've been hearing in the past couple days, we are a United States, and I hope that in Maryland, we could be generous. But as we've also heard, this is even at $25, this is an exorbitant fee. So I think we're just being reasonable here, and we may get, I'm not saying we shall get, we may get some of that money from out of state now if we have a reasonable fee. So that would be my response.
Okay, asked and answered. Any other questions? Seeing none, that concludes the public hearing on House Bill 291. Thank you very much, Delegate.
Thank you.
Let's proceed to House Bill 80. Delegate Charkoudian is in the House. Welcome back from the siesta or wherever you were.
Yeah, I was just taking a nap over here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 80, Purple Line Tree Replacement Plan. And I think that I don't need to tell this committee how crucial trees are, how crucial they are for the climate, how crucial they are though for the local walkability, the health, localized air pollution, shade, making an area transit and pedestrian and bike friendly. We're thrilled that we have the Purple Line being built in our communities. But unfortunately, in building the Purple Line, what happened was there was a need to take out a number of mature trees, and many of those mature trees were taken out in communities like Langley Park and Long Branch, and communities that are heat islands, and communities that have significant environmental justice concerns already, localized air pollution, and where people are heavily transit dependent. Now, the way that our laws are currently structured, and I think you all know this, is that when trees are taken out from one place, they get replaced someplace. And for the most part, that is what happened with the Purple Line. So the Purple Line project went through and followed all of the state laws, but the trees got replaced several miles away from the communities where they were taken from. And one of the reasons for that is because in order to replace them in the communities where they were taken, it would require a level of coordination. There's not enough space on the state land. It requires coordination with state, county, local, private land, MCPS, all of whom are willing to cooperate, but because there is no body who is responsible for bringing all those folks together to manage the tree replacement, it hasn't happened. I spent a year trying to connect with all of these different agencies, everyone who sort of said, well, somebody else is responsible for that, but we'll work with them if somebody asks us where to put the tree. So what this bill does, and I hope it's a model for other projects going forward, is it essentially says the Department of Transportation is responsible for working with all of these different agencies and local businesses and residents to find a way to coordinate tree replacement in the communities where they were taken from, with a priority for communities suffering from environmental justice issues and the heat island effect. Urge a favorable report and happy to take questions.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor of this bill that apparently has no opponents? Seeing none, thank you. Seeing none, thank you very much. Let's go to Talisha Searcy of Tacoma Park. Talisha? Okay, we'll go to Ashanti Martinez.
Thank you so much, Chairman and members of the committee. I am Ashanti Martinez on behalf of CASA. Speaking in support of HB 80, CASA is the region's largest community organization serving the immigrant community with a growing membership of over 100,000. Our mission at CASA is to create a more just society by building power and improving the quality of life in working class and immigrant communities. We believe that HB 80 provides to a growing issue along the Purple Line corridor. The bill works to correct the environmental injustice done to the community along the corridor after trees were removed and never replaced. Trees are important. Trees help counter the heat island effect, which happens when buildings and roads absorb and release heat into the surrounding areas, which makes everything around it much warmer. This unfair reality for urban areas, as you can imagine, is only exacerbated when trees are removed. Walking, biking, and use of public transportation is how many of our members at CASA move. The removal of trees along these sidewalks and roadways that they use make an already unpleasant commute even more difficult without the benefit of shade from trees. We thank the bill sponsor for her leadership in this area and ask the committee to provide a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is Talisha Searcy around? No? Okay, we'll go to Paul Grenier. Paul?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, you got 2 minutes. Welcome.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chairman Barve and members of the committee. I'm here also in support of HB 80. My name, again, is Paul Grenier. I help administer a small business district in East Silver Spring called the Long Branch Business League. And I also work for MHP, an affordable housing and neighborhood building organization, also based in Silver Spring. And Just in December, I planted with, I was out with a shovel on the street in Long Branch, helping a team plant 5 trees in tree boxes, which were completely empty and looking blighted until we replaced those missing trees. But what we realized as we were researching the tree issue in Long Branch is that there's many broken and diseased and dying and missing trees throughout the entire commercial area. It's a commercial area that also already faces a great many challenges, from lost parking due to the Purple Line construction and other issues, and of course, all the other terrible problems that small businesses are facing these days. But once we put in the new trees, it just made a tremendous difference. It would really be a huge shot in the arm to this whole business district if these trees that were knocked down because of the Purple Line construction, if they could be shifted to this area, which is so desperately in need of them, and the neighborhood and our organizations don't have the resources to do it the right way and put in the bigger trees that the area really needs. At the same time, I think we could help Representative Charkoudian, who's been such a great help to this area already, because we studied the tree planting issue, the species that the area needs, which ones will survive, how to do it. We'd be just delighted to help, and we'd like to invite you all to help us plant the trees. It's a lot of fun. Thank you very much. I hope the bill passes.
Okay, one last take here. Is Talisha Searcy in the House? Apparently not. So we're going to proceed to questions. First question goes to Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this legislation, Delegate Charkoudian. It seems excellent. My question is about the responsible agency, about you designating the Department of Transportation. I wondered if you had considered the Department of Agriculture instead, or maybe in consultation with DOT, because if I'm remembering correctly from a few years back in my time on the county council dealing with state arborists about some trees in county rights of way, I thought they came under the Department of Agriculture, but I might be remembering wrong. So I was just curious about your choice of DOT.
Sure, it's a great question. Thank you for that. And I think my thinking was, because I spoke with, well, no, I didn't speak with the Department of Agriculture, so that's an interesting possibility. But I was looking at MDE and DNR, who also do a lot of work with trees. And then I was also looking at the local agencies, had multiple conversations with Purple Line partners. Ultimately, what I realized in trying to bring all these people together myself to try to coordinate a plan was some agency needed to be responsible. And why I ultimately went with Department of Transportation is because they sort of have this big picture for the whole corridor. They are responsible for overseeing the work on the entire corridor already. And they are working through Purple Line Partners, MTA and others, and SHA, they're working with all of these partners along the route. So the business lines, the local government, county and municipal local government, as well as MCPS and others who their staging areas and MCPS and so on and so forth. So because they sort of already have all those partnerships in this particular project, they seemed like the natural agency to ask to then coordinate the work amongst all of these various groups that need to be coordinated in order to get the trees planted.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of what I expected. I would just say, and I understand the issue certainly with street trees, but it's just again, someone you or someone else should follow up and figure out the actual expertise of arborists. I believe are housed in the Department of Agriculture. So maybe it could be a consultation situation. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd welcome an amendment to clarify that if that would be helpful too.
Next question goes to Delegate Fraser Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate. I was looking at the fiscal note. Did you talk to MDOT? I know there are a lot of different kind of hands in the soup, so to speak. Have you? Can you address the fiscal note at all?
Yeah, sure. So I was frankly shocked to see the fiscal note. I've been having conversations actually directly with Secretary Slater, and I want to be careful about speaking for him. I think I'll just leave it at that. We were shared some surprise. I think that potentially there may be some confusion, and I have reached out again to Secretary Slater since seeing the fiscal note. He seems to think that the coordination role is one that could be done, and that there's already this connection to trees with DNR for other state highway projects. And so I expect we're going to reconnect, the secretary and his staff and I expect we may have some revisions to that without significant change to the bill itself, but we'll be in touch. Thanks for asking.
Okay, question goes to Delegate Wyville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate. Also, in regards to the fiscal note, it says that MTA did work with DNR to comply with the requirements of the Forest Conservation Act. So does your bill, so I'm assuming they are replacing the trees, but just not in the communities where they're being removed? Is that all your bill is doing, is saying they should be replaced in the community where they're being removed?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That's exactly right. So right now, and this is what I was saying, is I hope this becomes potentially a model for other projects. Right now, the Forest Conservation Act is strong in some ways, and there is a net replacement across the state. It's important from a climate perspective, but for the individual communities from which they were taken, for the localized effects of trees, you have that environmental injustice, because when the construction continues to happen in communities already affected by the heat island effect and localized pollution, replacing the trees, even in a way consistent with the Forest Conservation Act, doesn't help that immediate community, even though it is net positive for the climate.
So is the $1 million per year fiscal note because they were going to replace them somewhere else where it was less expensive, or did the fiscal note writer misunderstand the bill?
Yeah, I don't want to, I want to be careful because I'm not sure who misunderstood, but I just, as I said, when I reached back out to the secretary, it's my sense that if we once there's a clear understanding of the bill, the fiscal note will be different, because I don't think there's a way that the project as it's currently written. Yeah, it's my sense from my conversations with the secretary that we're going to see a different fiscal note once we get some clarification.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions for?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Who?
Delegate Learman.
Oh, you had a little clappy thing up instead of the
I don't know
hand.
how to do the other one. I'm sorry.
Well, that's it. You can't ask a question then.
Yeah. I just had it very briefly. So the red line, we had money for trees and when it was a thing, and part of the money, we got to keep part of the money, and the money was coordinated through MTA and with an MOU with our local rec and parks. So MTA didn't really do anything. They just created an MOU with our Rec and Parks division, and then our Rec and Parks division decided where the trees would go along the red line corridor, like somewhere within the red line corridor. And so I just offer that to you as like, there is precedent. MTA could pull out the MOU that it had with Baltimore City Rec and Parks, and you could probably replicate it and do a Prince George's and a Montgomery County. So there was an MOU with all three of them. So just one other alternative I wanted to say to think about.
Well, thank you for that. First, I was disappointed that you weren't clapping for me, but that comment was worth not being clapped for, but instead having been raised. Thank you.
I'm clapping inside. I'm clapping inside for more
Thank
trees.
you. I'll look into that as well. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Delegate Otto has a question. You need to unmute yourself. Charles, you need to unmute yourself.
That comment was worth not sure, but instead having been raised. Thank you.
There you go.
I'm concerned with this project. Some of what Delegate Lehrman brought up here, talking about the different things that they were going to do. Well, I don't have a real question, but what money are we talking about here, and how are you going to spend it?
Well, it's my understanding that from my conversations with the secretary, and again, I apologize that we weren't able to get the clarity before and the before this hearing, that the fiscal note potentially is going to change once we get some more clarity with the department. But I think that it's my understanding that the primary cost to the state is going to be in staff time to do coordination, because there already are programs that fund trees that we can tap into, and the land is essentially there because we're using some state land, some county land. Talisha Searcy, who was going to testify but had to leave at 3 o'clock, is the Tacoma Park City Council member whose district this goes through. The city's willing to have the trees planted on their land to do some care for those trees over time. So really the thing where we've been stuck, where I've been working for the last year to try to get these agencies together, I think it's just primarily staff time to get everyone coordinated, look at the maps, figure out where the trees can go, given where the purple line is going to go, because there is a line coming through. And that's really what the cost is. And I'm fairly certain it's going to be quite a bit lower than what the fiscal note says.
So is it, how do I say, subjecting the budget of the Department of Agriculture to a substantial investment, or?
Well, right now, agriculture is not in the bill, although there was a suggestion that they may have some expertise we might want to tap into. So right now, I suspect that what we're going to find once we sort things out with Department of Transportation, who's named in the bill, is that it will be some staff time. And then DNR is also to be coordinated with an MDE, and they already have programs in place that support tree planting. So I think we'd be tapping into programs that are already funded.
And so,
Charles, why don't you take this offline with her? I kind of want to move on a bit here. Is that okay?
All right, I understand.
Sure,
Yeah.
feel free to reach out anytime.
Okay, cool. All righty then. Any other questions for the presenters? Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Charkoudian. And we will proceed to House Bill 363, Delegate Learman.
Great, thank you so much. I would also like to say that I do not have the raise hand function. So that is, and I'm gonna have to figure out on Zoom. So I'm sorry that I keep clapping when I wanna raise my hand. Figure that out. Trish was just trying to show me.
I guess you didn't realize that was a deliberate decision. No, just.
Right. So good afternoon, committee mates. It's wonderful to have my first bill in front of you this afternoon. This is House Bill 363, which closes a loophole that I'm guessing many of us didn't know existed. So 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, I guess now, we passed comprehensive reform legislation revolved around the Ethics Commission and sexual harassment. And we made sure that there was a robust system in place, that if you brought a claim, you would not be retaliated against. If there was a witness who had evidence, that they wouldn't be retaliated against, and created a really robust accountability measures and protection measures for people who are bringing claims in this space. However, for anybody, any person bringing a claim of any other type of ethics violations or participating in any way in an investigation, there is no retaliation protection for them. So this bill closes that loophole. It says if you participate, if you're a witness or you are somebody who's bringing a claim of an ethics violation, you cannot be retaliated against by an official or an employee of the state for bringing that claim. So it's a very small bill. It's a simple concept. I think all of us want to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable in bringing these claims and being witnesses, and we want to make sure that our ethics commission and our joint ethics committee is able to do the work and the investigation that it needs to do And in order to do that, they need witnesses. And right now, witnesses have no protection against retaliation. So I ask for a favorable report to make sure that our Joint Ethics Committee and the staff of the Joint Ethics Committee can do robust investigations and we can hold people accountable for their options. Thank you.
Thank you. It appears Delegate Healy has a question.
Yeah, this is just a question because I think it will come up in discussions later. And I'm sure that it's been addressed, but there must be the ability to go after someone who maliciously makes false accusations in any field of ethics. And particularly if they do it all the time and they go after lots of people and they try to make a thing out of it. Do you have a response to that in your bill?
No, so the bill does not address that. The bill simply addresses if you are a witness to say somebody brings, false claims against you knowingly. I mean, that in and of itself could be an ethics violation. And you are a witness and knowing, or somebody, or Delegate Stewart is a witness and knows that those were false claims. He has no protection from retaliation right now. So it simply doesn't exist in the code right now. It's, really an oversight, and it makes it difficult for the Joint Ethics Committee staff to do their job, for Joint Ethics Committee members to have robust investigations, because it's scarier for people to bring and more uncertain for people to bring claims. So this just addresses retaliation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Delegate Parrott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question. Have there been any examples where this has been a problem with people who are witnesses?
So we wouldn't know that right now because much of it is confidential. And so I have heard that, yes, it is a problem, but I do not have specific cases because people don't want to say, oh, I got fired or, oh, I got demoted because I brought this claim. And often it's I don't want to testify against that person because then I may get demoted. And so it's just this bill is making sure that people don't have that fear. But I do believe that it has been a problem in the past. I have spoken with staff, shall we say, about this issue. And so, yes, it has been a problem. And you know what, though, even if it hadn't been a problem, it still needs to pass, because going forward, we can't guarantee that every person who has information or evidence on an ethics claim feels safe from retaliation until we have this in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, let's go to Adina Britt is signed up in favor, and then Jillian Lord is signed up favorable with amendments. So we'll take Adina first. And Adina, are you in the room?
No, I think she just wanted to state her.
Oh, okay. Did I misread that? I'm sorry. It says, oh, you're right. Pardon me. She didn't want to testify. Okay, Jillian Lord. Jillian.
Here we go.
Okay. Well, okay, the nature, what?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, there we go. Great.
My name is Jillian Lord. My name is Jillian Lord. I'd first like to say that I'm here as a private Maryland citizen and not a state employee. Therefore, anything I claim or state begins with "I've been told." There are too many state employees with integrity who have suffered retaliation simply because they tell the truth and refuse to participate in the discriminatory, illegal, and unethical practices of those in their chain of command. An employee's fear of retaliation and loss of employment for reporting or even participating in an investigation is real. Retaliation is commonly practiced within many state agencies in an attempt to prevent those in authority from being held accountable for their illegal actions. These methods have had the desired effect of keeping most state employees, mainly minorities, silent and submissive. So I've been told. This is why HB 363 is so important. This bill should also help bring accountability and transparency to all areas within every state agency. Supporting this bill gives me hope that a delegate, senator, or even our governor will sponsor a bill that protects state employees even more. I propose that the offices of fair practice be standalone independent departments whose entire staff are designated as career-only employees and not hired by an appointing authority or political affiliation. They should be allowed to testify for or against state agencies at EEOC, MCCR, or state hearings. It is time for us to stop allowing these perpetrators, victimizers, to resign or retire without any type of disciplinary action. Stop transferring them to other state agencies to protect them from facing their victims at one of these hearings.
Okay, your 2 minutes are up if you'd like to
give the victims
conclude.
justice.
Okay.
Hold on, I'm almost finished. In the words of our late John Lewis, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. I am. It's now your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. It appears that Delegate Lehman has a question.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Delegate Lehrman, I meant to ask you this right after your testimony, but I was trying to pull up a copy of the bill. And I did not hear you address this, but is the definition of retaliation, like you know it when you see it, is that somewhere else in state law? Because it's not in the bill. And then the second part of that is, could retaliation include a counterclaim against someone bringing a claim? Would that fall under the definition?
Good question. It is in another place in state law. It's not in here. I don't know if a counterclaim would count, but I would imagine so. I think it's an adverse action. So that could be considered an adverse action, but I can look it up and get back to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 363. Let's go to House Bill 383, Delegate Carr. Al, you in the house?
I'm right here, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
By the way, you've got 4 minutes.
Thank you. It's good to be here with all of you for my third and final bill of the legislative session in good old ENT. So House Bill 383 is a bill that simply repeals the exemption for rental cars for red light cameras. So in Maryland, red light cameras were the very first type of automated enforcement authorized by law. That law has been in place for about 25 years. And the purpose of red light camera law is for safety, to protect drivers and pedestrians from the unsafe activity of blowing through a red light. Many jurisdictions have red light cameras. And if you do drive through a red light in front of a red light camera, you will get a citation in the mail for $75, except if you are driving a rental car. So that this bill simply repeals that exemption of the 20 states that have red light cameras authorized. If we were to pass this bill, this would put us in with the 17 other states that do not exempt rental cars, and we would no longer be with the 2 other states that do exempt rental cars. So if you were to pass this bill, we won't be asking rental car companies to do anything that they're not already doing, because they're already doing this in those 17 other states. They're also already doing this in Maryland, because in 2017, we passed a bill identical to this for school bus cameras. Rental car companies are also already doing this in Maryland for tolls. If you drive over the Bay Bridge in a rental car and get a video toll, the rental car company will pay it, and then they'll send you a bill to pay them plus an administrative fee. So this is not something that's new to them, not something that they're unable to do because they're already doing it. Now, If you like this idea, one amendment that you might want to consider is to simplify the bill and just make it a straight repeal. The way it's written right now is a notice is sent to the rental car company, and they have 45 days to send back the information about the renter. But what we've learned in the 4 years since enacting this identical language for school bus cameras is that the rental car companies aren't doing that. They're simply paying the citation, and then they're pursuing their renter per the rental contract to collect. So I know Montgomery County had a little concern about the way this is written, even though we've had this for 4 years. A solution might be to just have a clean repeal. It would be a much shorter bill, page 2, line 13, just deleting those 2 words. So with that, I will ask for your favorable report and leave this bill to the wisdom of the committee. Thank you.
Okay. There appear to be 2 questions for the sponsor. First one goes to Delegate Lehman. Mary? No?
No, sorry.
Delegate Fraser Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Carr, this sounds eerily familiar to a bill. Did we have a bill just like maybe 2 or 3 years ago doing the exact same thing or something very similar? Was that your bill, or this bill is ringing a lot of bells for me?
Yeah, so the history is in 2016, there was a similar bill that repealed this exemption for speed cameras. And what this committee decided to do was to send that to summer study. And then the result of that summer study was the 2017 bill that I'd almost call it like a pilot program, which would be to repeal this language for school bus cameras. And that bill passed. So we've had 4 years of experience with that under red light cameras. And we knew back then that about 4% of the citations are being discarded because they're due to rental cars. And now we know that the rental car companies aren't using that 45-day provision. They're simply paying it. So we could even do it a simpler and cleaner way.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, let's go to the witnesses. And those witnesses are James Hedrick and Michael DiLorenzo. So James Hedrick of Rockville, Maryland, welcome to the committee.
I think he
had to leave the meeting, I believe.
Okay, Michael. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself and please proceed.
There we go. I got myself unmuted. Okay. So hi, delegates. It's been a long day. My name is Mike DiLorenzo. I run the local company called NextCar. I have 17 stores in the state of Maryland. We are part of the Fitzgerald Auto Group family of companies. I am a constituent of most of you if you count my stores, 5 in Montgomery County, 2 in PG, 3 Baltimore City, 3 Baltimore County, 2 in Anne Arundel, including BWI Airport in Terminal, 1 in Frederick, and 1 in St. Mary's. My customers and my employees are your constituents. So the way this shakes out is I got some different numbers on checking my data in preparation for this talk. In 2019 fiscal year, I went pre-COVID to see what was really happening. 2% of my customers got a Maryland red light camera ticket, 2,300 of them out of 110,000. So we're talking about a very small number of people. I paid 572 of those tickets, and I transferred liability for the balance of them to the customer. This has been going on since 2017 because the companies that administer your traffic ticket programs, the contractors you use, they put a paragraph on the back of every red light camera ticket Oh, and by the way, now we have stoplight camera tickets. I bet you didn't know that yet. So this process has been going on for 3 years. You're not going to make any more money. So if the fiscal note says you're going to get a whole bunch more money, we're already administering this program exactly like the law lays out. So this shouldn't be about money. It should be about safety. So let's go over the points that I did make.
You know, you've actually only got 1 or 2 seconds remaining. So if you could summarize, that'd be terrific.
Page 4, lines 10 and 14, you need to add language about stolen license plates, which is the more common occurrence when a red light camera is issued to a car with stolen tags, 1. The next change that needs to be made is to eliminate the requirement for a copy of a police report on a stolen.
You know, I hate to be hurting you up, but I'm trying to maintain the same rules for everybody.
Okay.
Questions? Delegate Vaughn Stewart has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Lorenzo. I just had a quick question stemming from what the sponsor said earlier regarding just sort of exempting this outright. You know, if the school bus cameras, if they're sort of already just paying these things instead of taking advantage of the 45-day window, what are your thoughts on just sort of removing, just kind of ripping the Band-Aid off and just removing this exemption entirely?
Okay, so you want me to pay 2,500 tickets at $75 a crack instead of my customers? So you want me to pay you an additional $187,500 a year? You think that's fair?
I don't.
I want to be able to shift this to the customers. They're the ones that are running the red light. I'm not running the red light. I checked with Enterprise and they're not paying the tickets. They're shifting to the customer. Just like the law proposes to do, we're already doing that. So we don't want any more responsibility. I was there in the hallway when the exemption was carved in. It was called a carve out then with Michael Johansson as my lobbyist. I was there when this was done. I've been in this business in Maryland for 52 years. So we can't take any more cost. I already pay 7 times what the average citizen pays in automobile taxes per year, 7 times per car per year. So we can't take any more expense on our side of the transaction. You're not taxing out-of-state renters if you shift the liability to me. This business is split about 50% in-state renters and 50% out-of-state renters. So you're not shifting it to out-of-state renters either. You know, that's just the BWI traveler. The rest of the state is people who live here. My customers in Baltimore City can't afford to pay $75 that they're not supposed to pay. Now we shift to them when they're responsible. But you want me to include this in rental rates? If that's what you're talking about, is just taking away the whole exemption? We have to have the shift built into the law. That's putting the accountability on the person who ran the red light, not me, the fleet owner. I'm not driving the car.
I appreciate it. And just for the record, I don't particularly want you to do anything. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this bill sponsor's suggestion.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Parrott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this question is also for Mr. Dorlino. It sounds like if this bill were to pass, that you would have to raise rates for every person who's renting a car. And is that even possible if it's enterprise? How would that occur?
You know, there's only so much somebody will pay for a rental car. There are limits. Then you just take a limousine or a taxi cab or an Uber or a Lyft. There are many ways to do transportation. So you could just make it so expensive to rent a car that you just take the train to New York instead of renting a car and driving yourself up there. Or you take the dollar bus or whatever. So you can't put the cost in the car rental. You got to put the cost on the operator of the car. I got a funny story earlier today, and you guys will love this because it's a bit of a joke. What's the most dangerous part of a car? The nut behind the wheel.
Never heard of it. Delegate Wyville.
Mm-mm.
Oh, I don't know. I can't top that. Mr. De Lorenzo, do you have written testimony? Because you started down a list of amendments, but I don't see any testimony with your name attached to it.
I'm not smart enough to submit written testimony, but I can email something to you if you would like.
Yeah, we'll be happy to take whatever you have to offer us. Send it to the committee. Trish, is it on the website where to send that testimony?
Yes, it should be. The
Okay.
email on the committee page.
Yeah, on the committee
Okay.
page, there's an email address. I'll
Okay.
send it there.
Great.
That's
Yeah, we'd be happy to see your detailed written testimony. Any further questions for this presenter? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 383. Let's go to the last bill of the afternoon, House Bill 404, Delegate Fisher. Wanika.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I know you saved the best for last, which is why I'm last, so I'm excited.
Yes, that's exactly what I did.
Okay. Hold on. I'm sorry. I can't see the timer screen. Give me 1 second, Mr. Chair. Okay. Can I begin, Mr. Chair?
Go right ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Barve, Vice Chair Stein, and the illustrious members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Delegate Wanika Fisher from District 47, Prince George's County. I'm pleased to reintroduce HB 404. It was formerly HB 1180 last year. The purpose of this bill is speed monitoring systems in child care centers to authorize the placement and use of speed monitoring within a certain radius of an actual child care physical facility. This bill is essential in ensuring that all of our vehicles operate in a safe speed, especially near our youngest and most vulnerable, our children. Pedestrian safety is a huge issue in Maryland, and this esteemed committee in our legislature has allowed enabling legislation around speed cameras around our schools, but it is my perspective and others that you'll hear from that there's a gap in the law in the fact that it doesn't account for our actual child care centers with our tiniest and littlest children. HB 404, will ensure the safety and security of toddler pedestrians and daycare workers. This will fill the gap and allow only enabling local jurisdictions to put this in areas they deem appropriate. Parents deserve the assurance to know that their children will be safe while attending daycare and going in and out for different excursions at the daycare center. And I think that this will improve the safety in our overall community. I hope that this committee will give a favorable report to House Bill 404.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the Delegate Harrison has a question.
Yes, would it be better just to put child care centers, give them the same definition as a school? Because right now, I think around the state, we have, these issues, these setups in school zones. Would it be better just to name or define a child care center as a school so that we don't have to go and create a new traffic management plan for a daycare center? I do think that's a really interesting idea, Delegate Harrison, and I would be open. I'm not 100% sure if that would have different effects by adding it into a school definition. I think it would be something I'd have to work with the committee and potentially bill drafting just to make sure that I wasn't, unraveling something larger and including physical daycare centers. This bill is not for any daycare center in someone's home. A physical daycare center would be a part of that, but I would be open to working with this committee to make this possible.
Okay, Delegate Clark has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Fisher, this bill, would this only pertain in the counties on state roads, or would it also enable this on secondary roads, county-owned secondary roads?
It would be, hi Delegate Clark, good to see you. It would be my understanding, and council could correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it would be both and it'd be up to that county.
So it would be up to the county.
This wouldn't make it mandatory.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in some counties, like commissioner counties and stuff like that, I guess if a state law was passed, that would give them the ability to do that as opposed to having, getting local authority to be able to do that. Just curious, because, you know, a lot of our daycare centers in the rural areas could be on secondary country roads, out, you know, in neighborhoods and stuff like that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I actually have a question, Delegate. So I haven't read your bill yet. So how do you define a daycare center? Would a person who has a home in a residential neighborhood be a daycare center if he or she looks after a child?
Yes, no, Chairman Barvey, the bill, I can pull up the text, but I also don't want to like take up the committee's time. But in my bill, it does define like the physical building, a physical
Okay, so you go to
that's not in a home.
Okay, great. Well, I'll read.
Yes.
Okay.
Because otherwise it would be like a bill. Now I don't want to say a billion. It would just allow way too many. This is only for something that has a physical building, not a daycare center that's run through a residential home.
Okay, Delegate Ruth has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually raising my hand because Delegate Learman.
But you asked my question, Mr. Chairman, so thank you. Thank you, Delegate Ruth.
Okay, so we're going to have to put Delegate Learman through remedial hand-raising class.
I swear it's not there. I've taken pictures of my screen and sent it to Trish.
Okay. Also testifying in favor of the bill, Chief Robert Althoff. Chief, are you out there?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Chief Robert Althoff. I'm Chief of Police of the town of Brentwood. And I'm not respectfully not asking, but I'm pleading for your favorable response on this bill. The reason being is that I have a faith outreach child care center that has small children to school age children. They start to get there at 6 a.m. They are located on a state route, Rhode Island Avenue, Route 1, however you want to call it, in the town of Brentwood. I witnessed a lot of speeding in that area. I don't know if anybody else is familiar with it. To try to combat it, we had a red light put up there, and there's more people running the red light and speeding through that. So we put a red light camera there to help reduce traffic accidents and speeding. Currently, since mid-January of last year to now, we've recorded 1,222 traffic violations. We're running the red light. Majority of them are still continuing to speed through the camera. Also, in that when the lights turn green, it's just like a NASCAR race. When they wave the green flag, everybody comes up to speed and flies through the intersection. So one concern I have they did have one accident at the child care center where a car was exceeding the speed limit, crashed through their fence and struck 3 or 4 cars when people were actually in the parking lot. So with all that being said, I know time is an essence, but I respectfully plead if you guys could do a favorable report. I think it's time, and the healthcare, the child care center is praying also. So that'll be my testimony, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from the committee? Any questions? Well, seeing none, that concludes the public hearing on House Bill 404, and it concludes the public hearing for this afternoon. Announcements. Anybody have any announcements?
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I have to go, if I can be excused, to go back to judiciary. And I forgot to mention that the Maryland State Child Care Association couldn't attend, but they submitted written testimony in support.
Okay, sure. We'll take a look at that. Thank you. Okay, any announcements? guys. Up, David.
Motor vehicle, we were going to meet at 5:30, and I'm just kind of wondering whether we could meet a little bit early if that helps people. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. 5? Okay, that's
5.
So we have we only have 2 bills and some conversation on the agenda, so which should be it should be pretty quick. And sorry, Jay, Regina beat you to it.
Okay, Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious whether there has been a conversation with you, with other members, or with Chair Clippinger about what I believe are a number of housing bills that have been sent this session to judiciary instead of ENT. I know one of mine has, and I wonder what is being done about it.
Well, let me say that, and in fact, I was meaning to talk to Delegate Wells about this because she raised the issue with me personally. It seems like a lot of the bills that are being put in this year have more of a judicial component to them, and so I'm going to be re-reviewing all of those bills to see if any of them ought to be primary in our committee instead of secondary. But I mean, for example, one that clearly belongs in the Judiciary Committee is the bill that has to do with raising the fees for filing a eviction case in the court system. That's one that clearly belongs in judiciary, but the others are a little more gray, and I'm still working on them. So to answer your question, yes, there's ongoing conversation on that.
Okay, so one quick follow-up. I appreciate that. Because on one of those bills, and I'll have a second one, there is one hearing in judiciary, but you're talking about a potential scenario of a jointly referred bill rather than moving it from judiciary just to ENT. You're thinking the resolution will be, the bills will be jointly referred?
I think in most cases, yeah.
Okay.
But again, you know, I haven't read all of these things. I read Melissa's, for example, and one other, but I haven't read all of these bills. I will, you know, back when I was majority leader, that was back in the days when they would allow us majority leaders to assign bills to committees. And I only got it wrong 25% of the time, and they'd reassign things different places. But, you know, so, you know, some of these are jump balls. Some of these get very confusing. So thanks for bringing it up, and I'll report back to everybody when I have a little more information. Delegate Holmes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a plea. Please don't force me to go to judiciary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I won't force you to go to judiciary. Delegate Wells.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify Delegate Lehman's question. So currently, those bills have judiciary as the primary, and
A bunch of them do, yeah.
Okay, and so just so I'm clear, is that different from them being jointly assigned?
Typically, when a bill is assigned to 2 committees, one committee is the primary and the other is the secondary. I mean, an example of are some of the plastic regulation bills from prior years that people had, which were primary in ECM and secondary in our committee. So it's not unusual for that sort of thing to happen.
Okay, so because I guess I just figured that's currently what it is jointly assigned with judiciary as a primary, and the ask is if we could have ENT be the primary, correct?
Yeah, I'm still working on that.
Okay, yeah, no, I just want to make sure I understood what means basically in this case.
Right.
Thank you.
Did somebody else have their hand up? Okay, apparently not. Let me just say one thing to the entire committee here. We have a bunch of bills that passed last year, and my intention is to punch them out this year as well. I know some people oppose these bills. So if you're the chair of a committee and a bill looks like it's in trouble, don't just defeat it. Come and talk to me so that we can find out what's going on. If it's a bill that we passed last year, it really shouldn't be in any trouble. But if it looks like it might be, talk to me. Don't do anything extreme. So questions or announcements? Okay, and that, oh, Delegate Boyce?
I'm just saying this because I was a fool the other day looking for the mute button. I mean, not the mute button, the raise hand function.
Okay.
Reason, for some people, it's under the reactions. For other people, it's under the participants. I was used to going to the participants and could not find it. So I would just keep raising my hand until I found it yesterday. So I'm just
bro.
Yes, and Regina and Delegate Boyce and Delegate Stewart just texted me photos. So thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Everybody should clap for that. Okay, so I meant the clap function. Anyway, okay, any other questions? All righty then. In that case,